Welcome, Sovereign Sisters, to the Sovereign Sisterhood Movement Podcast. I'm Veronica Barragan, and I'm joined here today with my wonderful co-host, Elvira, where today we're going to be diving into a topic that impacts so many of us in ways that we might not even realize. And what I'm referring to is inherited grief. And this is not just about personal loss. It's about the weight of grief that travels through generations, shaping our emotional, our mental, and our physical well-being. What do you think?
Yeah, honestly, I'm still trying to process our last podcast. I always re-listen to that, and I just finished it this morning, and I'm still trying to process everything that was discussed. I feel it was a one-on-one coaching call live for everybody to see because I've dealt with physical illness, so but yeah, it's all related even now dealing with grief.
Yeah,
Ancestral.
that's the crazy part, that it is all connected. Like
Yes.
when we think about grief, whether it's personal or inherited, I can assure you it is very overwhelming. And because it's so overwhelming, we, first of all, have never really been taught how to deal with it. We don't even know what it is. We're going to talk today about what it is and how it's passed down. So then we not only not know how to deal with it, then it goes untreated, which then just that we were talking about last week, these emotions, they start as an emotion, but then they end up turning into physical illness. But I don't know about you, but I don't, it's so difficult to heal grief when you think about, like, I think about my ancestors and especially like my grandma, and I swear to you, like, I feel like her whole life was a grief story. Like it started with my grandfather when he was murdered, and she was left with like 8 children. And since then, then after that, like a year or two later, I think my uncle died of a heart failure. And then after that, they had another really tragic thing happen in the family with another death. And then after that, another one of her sons died. And then after that, another one of her daughters died. Like I have so much compassion for my mom because I understand her. Like I can't even fathom. If it was so hard for me when my favorite aunt in the world transitioned when I was 8 years old, I can't even imagine my mother living through all of that her entire life. And then not only that, but I think there's also something else that we need to speak on, and that is miscarriages. Because it's horrible. I mean, there's not even a word for when a mother buries her son or daughter, right? Like when you bury your husband, you're a widow, right? And what happens when you have to bury a child, right? There's no word for it. And this is something, miscarriages have become so much more common now because of the levels of stress that women live under, as well as then the combination of the nasty foods and what they put in the foods, right? That I really think that we need to talk about this because I bet you anything, I have found out that ancestors of mine have had miscarriages and they never talked about them. And all of a sudden they tell me, later on in their life. And I was like, oh my God, well, how did you cope with that? And they're like, well, I just got over it. And these things, that's the whole thing about grief that we need to talk about today. It is so overwhelming. And I think both of us have gone through our own personal experiences of grief, but I want to really focus on like putting it together with the family and with the lineage because I think that none of us have ever been taught how to heal from grief. I don't know. What about you?
I don't think they even know how they even dealt with it. I know with my abuelita, she had little babies. I don't know if they were she was pregnant and lost the pregnancy, but I know I'm pretty sure no. If she had the babies and they died. I
Hmm.
think there was at least three of them.
Yeah.
And one of them was, in El Rancho, there was bit by a scorpion or something like that. And when she found the baby, it was in the crib and she saw the scorpion, she was like, oh, you know. And again, when my grandfather, when he left her with, I think there was eight of them by herself. And then my mother, there's actually five siblings where there's five of us. There's the oldest one that didn't make it, and then there's me, and there's my sister that was stillborn. My mom was already at the hospital going to have her give birth to her, and she got tied in the umbilical cord, so she passed away. I've seen it in so many levels. I think I don't even know how they went through that because I have an aunt who lost her son. My cousin, he was 20 something years old, very young, had cancer, and she's not the same. I could see it in her face, her facial expression. She tries, but she's not the same. I don't know how they move forward after losing a child, but I think it's also, it goes down because it's not even discussed. We don't even talk about it. I know even with my sister, because I was waiting for her. I was 5 years old and I'm waiting for her. And when she didn't make it, I was upset. I mean, I was upset because I was waiting for her. And then I remember seeing her. They showed her to us, but I don't remember her face. But my mom never talks about her. Like I always remember her birth date because it's very close to mine. And every year I remember. I even see her date of birth just randomly. I'm like, oh, that's her date of birth. I just see her date of birth just randomly, constantly. I see it all the time. But I remember telling my mother, I'm like, calling her, do you know what today is? She's like, no, it's Susan's birthday. She's like, oh, after a while, I just stopped calling her and reminding her because I don't know if she just tries to disconnect from it
Mm.
because that's her way of not dealing with it. You know what I mean? Everybody deals with it different. But
Oh,
I do see a lot of I follow this guy who does the decodification,
oh yeah.
descodificación.
Mhm.
So they say a lot of women that have now dealing with pregnancy issues, they can't get pregnant or they have miscarriages, besides correlated with the environment that we're living in, it comes ancestral because we haven't dealt with the miscarriages. We're not discussing it, we're not healing it. So now these generations are having issues because of the generations before that is not being discussed or healed.
Yeah. Yeah. That was exactly
Makes
my
sense.
shock.
And it makes sense.
Yeah, because I don't know about you, were you surprised that these things like miscarriages happen in your family? Like I didn't know that happened to people in my family. Like later it came up. So first of all, they don't talk about it, especially their generation. Their generation, it's just like under the rug, get over it. And the
Yeah.
whole thing about pregnancy that women need to understand, and then I want to go back to like your mom's situation too, because that's sad for you and also sad for her, right? Because of the way she probably blocks everything. She doesn't want to remember anything, right? But with miscarriages, even if you've been pregnant for just a week, just a week, the body starts to change hormonally. It starts to prepare itself for the baby. So even if you've only been pregnant for a week, when you have a miscarriage, it's like if you were pregnant for the 9, the 10 months or whatever that is, right? Because the body doesn't understand that the baby, what happened to the baby, and even this even happens when we give birth. Why is there so much postpartum depression? Because it's proven that when we give birth, it's like we're missing something, like we're empty, like we're like literally like we're like we're broken completely. So this happens at birth, which is why the hormones are all over the place, and then people get postpartum depression very easily. I had it with my second. I didn't have it with my first, but with my second I did. And then we have the miscarriage situation that women are just told get over it. Just get over it. And there is no support or no help to help them deal with that because ultimately grief is this the most horrible, I think, emotion that one can go through because you feel so impotent. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing. Grief is so much attached to it's attached to broken relationships, obviously. But when we talk about death and transition, like there's no going back. Like you have to accept it. And that's the whole thing that is very, very difficult. And I can only imagine like with your mom and do you remember what her demeanor was? Like, do you feel that when that happened with the baby, with the child that she lost, that your little sister, was she more depressed before or after? Was there a shift or do you feel like she was always kind of the same?
She's I feel she's always been kind of disconnected all of my childhood, but I know for a fact after she lost Susan, it was even more because it was around the time that I started school and she would never get up in the morning. It's like I didn't have a parent in the house. I would get up by myself. pour myself a bowl of cereal, and I never saw her in the morning. She was never around. She was always in bed. But I'm assuming it just hit her even harder because she lost that little baby.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
1,000. And what about you as a 5-year-old? Do you remember, like, were you crying? What did you, do you remember?
I just remember being very sad because I really wanted a sister. So I was waiting for her. So when she wasn't born, I remember my dad, I just remember being sad. I don't know if I remember if I cried or not. I just remember my dad telling me, "Do you want to see her?" And I was like, "How am I going to see her? Like, she passed away." And he's like, "We could go see her." And I was like, "Okay." And I just remember him holding me in his arms, carrying me. And behind the glass window, they just pull her out of a drawer, and they just lifted her up like this, and they showed her to us. I just don't remember her face. I can't remember her face. But I remember they were holding her like this, but for whatever reason, I cannot remember her face. And I remember my mom came with us, and she started crying, and she ran away. She couldn't stay. And I remember her opening the doors, and she just went into the room, I guess, crying. And we just turned around and looked at her, run away, and then we went back to looking at Susan, and that was it. I just remember being sad until she got pregnant again with my sister Priscilla, and then I was excited, like, okay, I'm finally gonna get my sister because I really wanted to have a sister.
When did Priscilla come? How many years later?
2 years later.
Oh my God. She must have been made way more cautious, but it sounds like she was blocking the pain, she just really
Yeah.
didn't want to deal with it. And that's what I mean. That's so sad, like no help for her, that causes, this is what I mean about generational trauma. It's not just abuse, right? Or it's not just like what they did or didn't do for us. It's like these things, these
Yeah.
tragic losses that were never healed, that then causes them, our parents or whoever went through it, to be more depressed, to be more alienated, to be less there for us as children. And I think you could probably agree that as an adult, you understand it, but you still had to go through that journey to heal it, right? Because it's two different things, to understand it with your mind and to actually rebuild the nervous system and the brain and all the different ways that we feel so exiled, don't you think?
I'm Something's just coming to me. Could it be that postpartum depression, not only because of the imbalance of hormones,
Mm.
could it possibly be also the lineage of feeling of that loss of, okay, I gave birth, or maybe that guilt?
Yes.
I gave birth to this child, and all these other little babies in my generation weren't born, because I went through really hardcore postpartum depression with my oldest, to the point where I wouldn't harm her,
Mhm.
but I was depressed, crying all day long, to the
Mm.
point that I didn't even want to shower. I didn't want to do anything. I would literally get in the shower right before my husband would get home from work because I felt embarrassed for him to come home and I hadn't even showered.
Wow.
That's why I would shower, because I felt embarrassed that he would come home and I hadn't even showered. But I was so incredibly depressed. But maybe it has something to do with that too. That guilt that I'm giving birth, I was able to give birth. And then my ancestors lost all these babies through either through whatever, a scorpion bite or miscarriage, whatever. You know what I mean? It could be related.
Oh, 1,000%, Elvira. And when we did that episode about guilt, I mean, that this is exactly such an aha moment. Guilt is deeper than what you think you did.
Yeah.
It's these memories that live in the fascia, that live in the DNA.
Yeah.
And remember, their coping mechanism was probably like just retreat, don't talk about it. There was no way for them to respond in a way that they healed, right? So absolutely. And then you feel guilty because, well, my mom went through that. Why am I even worthy of having this child? And I'll tell you a perfect story of this. It actually happened in my family where I haven't, well, she's like my cousin because her mom is my dad's brother. And she's the most caring, the most, one of those mothers that is like hovering over the child, like very, very protective, very took care of her kids, okay? Goes to Mexico. Is in Mexico. The baby, her father asked her to feed him, and she was serving him a plate. The baby goes to the backyard. There's cows there and horses. Somehow, because the door was open, the little baby got out where the cow kicked the baby. And it was not only the blow, but the baby fell inside dirty water. So she inhaled the dirty water. So they're not sure if she drowned because of, or she drowned, or it was because the baby was kicked, right? Horribly traumatic experience. Horrific, horrific, right? I still remember it. I was like 10, but I remember it so clearly because I remember the little baby. In fact, the little baby, I would carry her and she scratched me one time and I still have like a little scar of her. I would always say like, oh, that was like her little memory that she left me. Well, then I call her Tia. She has a child and she has more children, right? Her daughter, I kid you not, and to this day, she has not been able to have babies again because her daughter, it was a son. Her son passed away too.
Oh,
Her son passed away. He was stillborn. But what I'm saying is that if she grew up with this fear, and I'm not saying the mom, my aunt, caused it or anything like that,
yeah,
but when you're in the environment of fear because you haven't dealt with the grief of somebody losing someone tragic, it's like this is something that I had to heal in my husband because in his family, my on his mom's side, the grandpa, he died in a very tragic car accident. And this grandpa was like the most beautiful grandpa, like a saint, right? And when he died, it would cause a lot of like depression in the family. Well, my husband, anytime that he would get like really stressed or anything, he would talk about accidents. He would talk about accidents. All of a sudden, he would just be like, car accident, I've seen it and I've seen it. I go, that shit is in your vibration.
yeah.
That because your mom was not able, because she was already older. She was like 18 when he died. So she remembers everything. I go, your mom is still holding on to that grief. And that, even though she doesn't talk to you about it, that becomes a vibration that then gets trapped in your electromagnetic field. So we would always talk about this and be like, let's clear this, let's clear this. And we did a longa con cards for that, the chanting of the mantra. But this is exactly what happens. This is what I mean. When something tragic happens in the lineage, and then the person doesn't heal, even if they don't talk about it, they live in the vibration of fear, which then creates that vibration of electromagnetic field for others. And whether it does happen to you again, or like you feel guilty
Yeah,
because you had a healthy baby and look at what your mom went through. And
yeah.
that's the whole thing. Back then, you probably didn't catch it. You probably,
Oh
but
no.
now you're like, oh, I get it. So does that make sense?
Oh yeah. I think also if a woman gets pregnant through rape or something like that, I think it also, and they have that child for whatever reason throughout the lineage. I think I also see that too, where I've seen people, they have issues with their pregnancies, like siblings or whatever. They have issues in their pregnancy because they have very delicate pregnancies where they can't do stuff or they can't move or whatever. There has to be some kind of guilt or something. There's something correlated there. Also through stillborn, there's this psychologist, my old therapist. She talks a lot about also with stillborn when the umbilical cord gets around their neck. I'm sorry. Um, that's what happened to Susan. Is the mother's very controlling and she can't let go of the control, and that's why that happens. You know, there's certain reasons that they say certain things happen, and it to me it makes sense because my mom can be very controlling. She has, I think, because of her childhood, she feels she has to control everything.
Right.
So I see it. I'm like, oh, it makes sense to me. Like if I tell her, it won't make sense to her. She's like, that's not true.
Yeah, no.
But to me, I'm like, no, yes, I see it, you know. It's
Right.
just like either with other diseases, they say, you know, like I have scoliosis, they say, that same doctor says, yeah, because one parent pulls one way and the other parent pulls the other way. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, true. If
Mm.
I tell that to my parents, they'll be like, no. And I'm like, yes. But there's certain, yeah, there's certain correlations that I do see it.
And that gave me a really good visual what you just said because think about it. when we go through a traumatic experience, especially the death of somebody and our child, oh my God, that's like the worst thing you could ever go through, right? So what happens to our nervous system? It goes into fight and flight. It gets stuck there. There are grief and tragic, traumatic experiences like that. Our nervous system will constantly feel like it's under constant fight and flight. And also think about what happens spiritually. If something like that would happen to me, like I would be pissed off at God, to be honest with you. I mean, for a while before I did this healing journey, I was very mad at God. I was like, why would you, God, allow these things to happen, right? And my life, the reason why I'm here now is because I was always trying to control everything because weird things happen in my life, right? The trauma, the abuse, where I was like, well, God's not there. I got to figure this shit out. So control is our nervous system being stuck in fight and flight because of the trauma, which then means we don't trust God. We don't have a relationship with God. And we might not be saying it out loud, like, I'm mad at you, God. But at the core, we're like, I'm alone in this world. No one's there going to support me. So then what happens is that then they become controlling parents. And and this is the whole thing, even with things like SA abuse. Think about it. I've always talked about this. Why does a child continue to repeat the pattern of abuse, of SA abuse? If the mom was so hovering over the child, taking care of the child because she went through the same thing, right? I've seen these situations. Why would that happen? Well, because mom, and I'm not saying it's mom's fault, but if she is living under a constant state of fear that this is going to happen to her child because it happened to her, she is creating a frequency of fear. That's why a mother's mental health and nervous system is so important, because if a mother does not prey on her children, then those children are not protected. Children, especially, we're as children, we're pure. That it's the most sacred energy that of course darkness is going to be attracted to it. Of course. And if then you have a mom that instead of praying for you is worried about you, and I know you're going to say, well, that's unfair because not you, right? Our audience might say, that's unfair because I go through the trauma and now you're telling me to not be afraid. But that's exactly what I mean. This is why we need to address our nervous systems and address our brain rewiring, because if we are constantly worrying, that is a prayer for our children. That is literally us creating that vibration that fear is bringing to them these horrible situations. And then we wonder, I did the best so that my child did not have to go through what I went through. But doing the best is not, I think women think that doing the best means let's just not talk about it and I'm just gonna hover over you and protect you. When we all know that's impossible, because even every child has their own karmic path. I don't know. Does that make sense?
My mom has always been very fearful, exaggeratingly fearful. So I don't, she says she didn't go through the abuse, the SA abuse, but I did. But
Mhm.
she was always like very hovering, exaggeratingly protective, but it still happened, even though she was that protective. With my sister, the same thing. She didn't want her dating a gangster, cholo, whatever. And that's exactly what my sister was attracted to. But it's, you know what I mean, in her first marriage or whatever. And and I tell her, we tell her, Mom, you have to trust that I would always tell her that you raised me right. So now because it seemed like everything she was so fearful about, that's what actually happened. So with my kids now, when they're out and about because they're older, whatever, they go out, sometimes I get scared and I'm like, no. Right away, I'll cut it. I'm like, no, they are godly, they're divinely protected. God is watching them. I call in their guardian angels, archangel, whatever you believe in. And I'm like, they're fine. They're protected. They're smart kids. I taught them right. They're fine. Because if we start putting that energy out there, when I was younger, what I used to think was, if I think of the worst case scenario in my head, if I'm worried about someone, it's not going to happen. Like I don't know what mind of mine I used to. Okay, like if I couldn't get a hold of my parents, like what is happening, or my husband, I would think of the worst case scenario could happen, because that way it wasn't going to happen. That was It was torture. Now I'm like, no, I'm not going there. They're divinely protected. They're fine. Everything's taken care of. My kids are good. I'm not gonna go there.
Yeah. And that's because you did a lot of the healing work on the nervous system. And even now, as adults, it's not that we're not, I'm not trying to say, I know you're not trying to say that you'll never worry about them again. Like that's, shit crosses your mind. My sons were going to Flagstaff yesterday because there was a contractor, conference out there, but it's like 18 degrees, there's ice on the ground and they had to leave like at 4 in the morning. You better believe I was like, is this something that you think you really should be doing right now? And I did talk to them about it because I felt like as an intuition, like this wasn't the right thing to do. Like it was weird, right? But there's a difference between intuition and having a conversation with them and letting them decide and make their own decisions versus control. You're not going because this is a shit that's going to happen to you, which is what I used to be like, where when my nervous system wasn't regulated, it was control and constant worry. Constant worry. Like even when they were little, like are they being, no, I didn't know, they were never bullied, but I just wanted to make sure they were making friends, like the stupid stuff that we worry about. But it was always something, it was almost like I would pick on something, make them my project to worry on so that I wouldn't deal with what was really going on inside of
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
So, we can still, our kids are going to travel, they're going to go get married, they're going to go have children. And I'm sure my mom still worries about me and your mom still worries about you. But there's a difference between, they're doing something exciting and new, and then you start to kind of have versus I'm constantly like, something bad's going to happen, something bad's going to happen. And again, if you're listening to this, it's not blame. Now you're the one that's causing all these bad things for your children. That's not what I'm saying at all, because it doesn't work that way. It's not one worry and then boom, it manifests immediately. Like if it was like that, we would be manifesting everything
Yeah.
immediately, right? What I'm saying is it's so important for us as mothers to really take care of our nervous systems and our brains, because the best thing we can do for our children is trust God and trust them so that and deal with our grief because truly that's why we're so worried all the time, because if we can do that, then they're protected. They're protected by our prayer. I really do believe there's nothing more powerful than a mother's prayer. And when a mother falls asleep, or is depressed or hasn't dealt with their grief, her children are out there exposed. And
Yeah.
I've seen it. Like my mother-in-law has gone through so much too. She had cancer herself, and she worries a lot. But by the same token, she prays a lot. So she's been healed from cancer. My brother-in-law had cancer twice. To me, my brother-in-law is like a prophet. I swear to you. To me, he is like a standing representation of Jesus Christ. I mean, an amazing story with him. But I see that with my mother-in-law's prayers, that she, even though she has worried a lot, I think it kind of overrides like the prayer. My mom is a little bit different. My mom is was more controlling, like what you're describing with your mom. It's not that she would voice her prayer, it was just like literally she would control and she would control and she would control. But as she saw me heal, she backed off way more, because I think sometimes they feel like they have a right. Like if you, I don't agree with this with mothers. I don't know if you've seen this, but some mothers, they look at at the children, and then they look at the child that's suffering the most, or maybe is going through an addiction, or maybe has marriage problems or money problems, or whatever. And then they focus all the attention just on that child, and then they forget about the other children. And I think it's almost like they wear it as a badge of honor. The worrying or the I need to focus right here. And that's also very, very sad, because not only are you not dealing with your grief, but then you're also forgetting about these other children. Just because they're not voicing their pain doesn't mean that they don't need you too. I don't know. Have you seen this?
I think before I even did it myself, where they feel if I worry about you, it's
Yes.
because the amount of worry that I have for you is the amount of love that I have for you.
Yeah.
And it's so suffocating. It's like, no, no, that's not the way it works. Because I did it too. I felt that
Um,
if I worried and if I stressed about you, that was showing you how much I love you. And it doesn't work that way. And I think that's how we learned it from them. but it doesn't work because it stresses our nervous system goes so out of whack. It's so it just goes so it just doesn't work and it ends up making us even sick.
1,000%. And so, if it makes us sick, let's talk now about, well, what are some of the solutions to actually help us overcome and transcend this? Because grief is so tricky. You can't. I took a whole course as a Kundalini yoga therapist on grief, and one of the things we focused on is what not to say to people when they're going through the worst times of their life. Like when people have somebody has transition, they'll say things like, "Oh, she's in a better place," or "He's in a better place." That's actually really damaging. Like, to somebody who's going through that, like they're not gonna be able to understand that. So, from my understanding as a community therapist, is to truly just allow the person to feel and experience. Because one of the things that I was taught as a therapist, as a Kundalini therapist, is that grief is like a series of expansions and contractions. So it's contraction and expansion. So when you first go through something very traumatic like that, like the loss of a child or somebody you truly love, the only truly way to heal is to feel the contraction. And that's the hard part. When we are in the contraction, what does that mean? Everything takes over, right? Like the memories, the guilt, the what I should have done. But remember, the key there, and this is where support is very important, right? Community, a mentor, things of that nature, because that person can hold you in that contraction, meaning it's not my job to save you. In fact, it's my job to allow you to sit through that contraction, because what we are so afraid of is that we're not going to come out of that contraction. And I don't know if you've ever felt this. I have myself, where it feels so painful that it literally feels like I'm breaking apart. Have you
Yeah.
ever felt that?
Oh yeah, yeah. Multiple times, but I think definitely when I was going through the dark nights of the soul, it was incredibly painful because I was feeling everything. I've always been very sensitive, but I was getting so much awareness about my family, my lineage, that I think it came all at me at once, that it was so intense that I think I'm gonna lose my mind. I'm gonna end up being stuck here forever. Like this is never gonna feel good. But it's our ancestors, my family and stuff. I've noticed that they don't talk about it. They don't. My abuelita didn't talk about it. It was very like I knew like a couple stories here and there. I don't even know what happened to the other two. If the other my aunts or uncles, I don't even know exactly if they were boys or girls. Like what even happened? My mom doesn't really talk about it unless somebody brings it up. And I know I have like other people that I've known that have gone through either rape or stuff like that, that they end up getting pregnancy or abuse, whatever, and they don't talk about it. And I think that's maybe they just don't want to feel it either. And that's the problem too, that we need to feel it. We need to discuss it so we could all heal from it and learn from it and so it doesn't continue because it I do see it continuing in the lineage with other different sickness like difficulties getting pregnant or stuff like that.
Yeah. So what you're describing is kind of like the lineage is stuck in a contraction and they're not expanding
Yeah.
because they're not talking about it. They're not feeling it. And feeling it is that's why a lot of people are scared of meditation. There is a such thing, and I don't blame them, because when I first started Kundalini yoga, I remember when I first started yoga, like back in 2008. There's always like this savasana time where you do the work and then you lay out and rest. I was the girl that would wrap up the mat and I was out of there. I just came for the kriya. I'm out. I don't need to rest and relax. And my teacher would be like, "What do you like? This is the most important part." And I'm like, "I don't need that. I don't need that." I didn't realize that what I had because of trauma and because of so much cortisol running through my body, that I had what is known as in what is it, anxiety, relaxation induced anxiety. So a lot of people, and I don't blame them, they argue that putting them in a situation where they would need to meditate is like hell. And I've had clients, I have community members who have told me I cannot meditate because I feel like I go into this dark place and I'm not going to come back and I cannot do it. And I was like, holy shit. But now I understand. When you tell somebody who has a lot of trauma, cortisol, and grief that they haven't processed to just close their eyes and relax, it's like telling them to go into World War III. And so your body starts to create even more cortisol and adrenaline, which then puts you in a very anxious state. And that we don't want to do, right? Which is why when we do the Kundalini yoga therapy approach, when I teach in a therapeutic way, we always invite people, you can close your eyes or keep them open. You can lie down or stay sitting up. It's very different than if you were to go to like a regular Kundalini yoga class where it's just everybody having a class, right? So the key here is that the Kundalini yoga, what I've noticed, and this is why it was so effective for veterans who came back from war with like brain issues and things like that, that it's very active. Like in the morning, my sadhana practice is chanting. So even though I am sitting, I'm using my voice, and that voice is allowing me to move the energy versus me being just sitting here, closing my eyes and just being completely quiet, right? Which is why it supported me so much because I needed that. I needed more activity versus like just go into complete relaxation mode because the whole thing about grief is that in meditation, you're not processing it all. The memories come when you're at the gas station. The memories come when something reminds you of that person, right? So what the meditation did for me was that it allowed me to increase my life force energy, my prana, so that when the contraction hit, because it hit, I remember recently when my grandmother transitioned, it was it was such a weird thing because she suffered so much towards the end that you get to the point where you're like, God, why keep her suffering here? Why, God? Like, this is horrific. But the real shit hit the fan for me was when I saw my mom, what happened afterwards. She was left like a skeleton. Like, I was worried about her because she was in such a bad shape, right? So then it wasn't just me processing all these memories with grandma and all these things. It was also like, my God, what is my mom now going through? Like, this is never ending, never ending. So I remember that it was a series of just a bunch of contractions, and it was like it never felt like I was expanding. It was just like, bah, bah, bah. But I remembered, okay, all I need is prana. I can handle this. I can handle this. And I gotta accept it, right? I can't change this. And this is the whole thing. You can't rush your healing. You can't say, I need to be better by this date. It's impossible. But what I do know is that the more you allow yourself to contract, the more you allow, which is what became my meditation practice, right? The inhale and the exhale, the more I had the vitality, so that throughout the day, as I was then remembering, or then when I had to deal with my mom's illness after that, I didn't fall apart. Because
Yeah.
let me tell you, I could have easily fall apart. Like, there's so many times when people still tell me, like, I went to a quinceañera last weekend and I hadn't seen my cousins for a long time. And they're like, you really haven't drank alcohol like in 6 years? These are the same ones I used to party
Are
with,
you
like,
sure? And they're all checking your drinks.
yeah, they're like checking my, seriously. And one of them is such a jokester. He's like, are you sure? I go, do you want to smell my breath or what, And they couldn't believe it, but they're like, one of them was like, it's so easy with all the shit that has gone down for you to go back into the alcohol because that's how your ancestors dealt with the pain and that's how you used to deal with it. I go, yeah, but the difference now is that I have prana. As bad as it gets, I don't
Yes.
have to resort back to what I used to do. I can deal with these emotions and move through them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think when we talk about Kundalini yoga, I think a lot of people think, I have a feeling people think, oh, it's BS. But I can honestly say when you open Satori and we started the every week we were working on the 10 bodies. So every week we're working on one body. And we would be sitting there, you're doing your yoga, I'm doing mine, and we finish and I would be having these emotions and like tears are coming down. I'm like, what is happening? Like what? I couldn't explain it. And I look at you and you're like This was I don't know what. And I'm like, I'm not the only one. Like, it was affirmation, like, okay, I'm not imagining this. I'm not the only one. And I have like other friends that were taking Kundalini yoga separately,
Oh,
and
no.
they would tell me the same thing. They're like, you know what, you're right. This was happening to me, or this was happening to me. And you're right. Now, like, thank God, because I started this, because it's helped me to be able to process what everything that's been coming at me ever since. Because I know when my dad got sick in 2015, I was losing my mind. I couldn't handle it. When you opened Satori, what was it, around 2018? Somewhere around there.
No.
So thank God I had my son up pregnant. Thank God, because everything that's been coming at me ever since, like I tell my kids, I think I would be losing my mind if I didn't have my son up pregnant, if I didn't have my Kundalini yoga, because I wouldn't be able to process everything. I would, God forbid, I'll probably like be
Yeah.
drinking or doing whatever, because I wouldn't be able to poppy pills or something, because I wouldn't be able to process everything that's came at me ever since.
Yeah. Yeah, because you finally allowed your nervous system not to get stuck in fight and flight, you know? So instead of survival, you're moving into thriving now. And you know how it is with Kundalini Yoga. That's why I've said to people, this is not all love and light, because Kundalini Yoga, like sadhana, means truth is our identity. So that means that everything has to fall off that is not in truth to your identity. And that feels like, sometimes it feels like a punishment. Like, I got sick, I got physically ill. I got every kind of ill. And then people started like friends that I thought were friends. I found out that they were not friends and they started leaving my life. And just like, I was like, dang, this thing is getting worse. It's not getting better. You know what I mean?
At the same time, you get people that step away from us. They're just not.
Makes sense.
Why, if they're not really friends, why do we even want them around? It's painful. I did go through that, like a high school, since middle school friend that, she did something and our friendship just separated, and it was so painful for so long. But it's now I'm like, no, it just wasn't. It wasn't a true friendship. So why would I even want that around me?
Well, and also you got to think the way I saw it is that they were friends with me because they were friends with a version of an unhealed part
Mm.
of me. And I no longer participate in that, in those thoughts and those beliefs. And so we don't have anything in common. Like I went afterwards, I think it was like 5 years later after I left the real estate industry, there was a friend who called me and said, let's meet up, and we had lunch. I swear to God, her and I used to hang out all the time before, all the time. And it's like, we had nothing in common anymore. We had not that I'm better than her or else, not at all. She's got her thing going or whatever. But like I look at, she would not be somebody who I would hang around with anymore because we literally have different desires, different beliefs, different and then I looked at her and I was like, man, you have not changed at all. That's what gave me perspective. Like, holy shit, no wonder people tell you you've changed because you have changed. But we don't even notice because we're like still in our own, little world. But so I don't say that as a negative thing. People falling out of my life, that was perfect because I didn't need that. I don't even have time right now, to deal with but my family and the things that are happening around me and my family. But still, it's that's a big part of the healing journey, and a big part of healing grief is loss, that loss of even, I think I had to grieve my old self dying even because didn't you feel that way?
Oh yeah. Yes. Because I couldn't, you think you're this version of yourself, but you're really not. And that's part of the of the pain you're feeling, because you're not being authentically yourself, because you're trying to please everybody else. You're trying to be who your mother thought you wanted you to be, or your father wanted you to be, or what you thought your husband wanted you to be, or your sister wanted. And then it turns out it wasn't even what they wanted, or maybe, it wasn't even what my husband wanted me to be, or my sister needed me to be. Once I finally, you grieve that sad, like, oh, well, I thought this is who I was. But then you're coming into this new version, and then certain people are like, well, I don't like this version. You're not doing for me what you used to do for me, and run around and do everything that I asked you to. And I'm like, well, why do I want that person in my life anyways if they don't appreciate or they don't see how I'm better now or I'm happier now? And thank God, like my sister or my brother, they're like, or my, my husband, they're like, well, I like this version because this like, I see you now. This is who you are. And this is actually who I need you to be. And I'm like, okay. And I remember like years ago in Satori, you're panicking. You're telling me because somebody wanted to meet up with you and you're like, why do they want to meet with me? I don't want to meet. So I remember back in Satori, you were kind of freaking out because somebody from your past was coming back and you're like, why are they coming back into my life? Like, I don't even know. And I was like, I think maybe it is just so you could see how much you've grown. And you were like, oh my God, maybe that's what it is. But I think it is that because sometimes people leave our lives because they don't like this version of ourselves because for whatever reason we're not in the same vibration, and they come back just so we could see how much we have grown. We're not the same person and we see our own growth.
That's exactly what happened. Yeah, I remember you telling me that now because I was like, why is this happening? At that point, I think Mars was no, Mercury was retrograde. I was like, it's Mercury retrograde.
I always blame it on that.
Exactly. But that is true. And the whole thing is that if we I'll be honest, leaving the real estate industry when I first left, I was running away from it. I didn't really want to deal with anything there anymore. I felt like I needed to close that chapter, burn it, and never see it again. But that was an unhealed part of me too, because I should have. Now I'm very grateful for that part of my life. I'm very grateful for the people. But when I first left, I was like, I don't want to deal with anything because in a way, I was victimizing myself and kind of blaming that and blaming all those things. So I had to do a lot of maturing and through those years to come back to be like, this is true. But I remember you telling me that exactly. And that when you said that to me, I was like, okay, yeah, I gotta accept this. There's an unhealed also part of me that wants to run away from all this. But that's exactly what happens when we don't deal with grief. How many people have severe grieving stories that we don't even know about? And then you wonder, why are they always so mean? Or why are they always so fearful? Or how come they don't speak up their voice? Well, dear Lord, if we just sat and listened to some of these stories of what people have been through, I think, not feel sorry, because that's a whole other thing. But I think we could have a little more compassion because people don't understand I don't think they understand just how serious the loss of somebody or even a relationship can truly catapult you into very dark nights of the soul, put you in constant fight and flight. And absolutely, what we've been saying is how this pattern then gets passed over and over and over again. So what would you say to do for somebody who has not dealt with their grief?
I think like right now when you're talking about this, I'm seeing this grief and like a certain person in the sense of like they can't accept the decisions they made in their life.
Mhm.
So they're grieving that, but in the sense of they can't accept it, so they blaming everybody around them. So I mean, they're grieving. They're definitely grieving, but it's they can't come to the acceptance of, well, these were the decisions that I made in my life, so I need to take responsibility. So they're kind of blaming everybody around them. But I think the healing is going to come once they accept it, and it's like grieving an old version of ourselves as well, grieving everything we've gone through. They have to really, and it goes back to looking in the mirror. And a lot of times our ancestors, they don't want to look in the mirror and say, yeah, I lost this baby, or yeah, this happened to me, or this, and and even bring it up to the family because it's obviously it's painful. We get it, but it's a lot of times the things that we don't talk about, they keep repeating themselves, and it goes back to the same thing. It's like, I don't want my kids going through this. I don't want my kids feeling this grief, this sadness. Like I worry when I see somebody, well, I don't worry, but when I see somebody who's pregnant, I tell them, just postpartum depression is real. just be aware. If you ever feel it, you call me, whatever, because there's stuff that people don't even talk about. I had no idea. It was something it was like taboo. You don't talk about it.
You're so right. Even for our generation, when I had depression with my second one, it's like I didn't tell anybody. I didn't even know, to be honest with you, because we were told. I remember my dad saying around depression and stuff is like, that's not for us. That's only for American people. American people.
Yeah,
Like,
I didn't talk about it. I went like a year and a half dealing with it. I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was losing my mind. And I wouldn't talk about it because I didn't even know what was happening to me. I had no idea. I just thought I was going crazy.
right.
And my dad would say it all the time. Depression is not real. Now he tells my sister, I didn't think it was real. Now I see it is. But he won't tell me. He will only talk to my sister about it, which is fine. As long as he's talking about it,
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
But
I think
yeah,
it's the tough with our culture, it's the tough macho attitude. I think they've been told, especially men, I feel even worse for them because they've been told, but by the same token, I think in general, our culture, just you don't have depression.
my mom too. It's like, I mean, I'm glad that at that time the doctor wanted to give me medication. She's like, don't take it.
Wow.
But at the same time, okay, well, what is the other solution? There was
Right.
no other solution. There was no, let's talk about it. Let's find help. It was just thank God she was like, don't take the medication.
Right.
But it's like, well, then what do we do then? There was no other solution. There was nothing else. Just deal with it.
Exactly. That wasn't even better, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And that's why it's a threefold. I think we can spend a lot of time talking about like the spiritual aspects of, that death is not the end, it's the beginning. A Course in Miracles, from the perception or from the perspective of Jesus Christ, has given me a lot of peace about that. But that's like secondary. I feel like for somebody who has gone through a lot of grief and loss and hasn't dealt with it, the best approach is to deal with it first through meditation, because the meditation is gonna take your nervous system out of fight and flight and the brain, give it some oxygen so that then you can eventually get to that process of the spiritual healing. You could do it at the same time too, but I've noticed that with people like that have severe grief and then that they start like the Course in Miracles teachings, it's very triggering, the opposite. So we kind of like, I like to take both approaches, but making sure that we understand that it's not all love and light and that there are going to be emotions and feelings that you're going to have to feel, that you feel that you haven't felt for a long time. But if we do approach it through the nervous system, it will eventually fall off, because what you're doing is you're contracting and extending. And I'm not saying you will forever be changed, right? After someone transitions, after a serious illness, after the loss of a breakup, you will forever be changed, forever. But what is that change going to look like, right? Like, are you going to be closer to God, or are you going to be more angry with God? And God's not mad at you in whatever you decide, right? But those are the two things that happen. It's either you get closer to God or you don't. And a big part of it is what you just kind of talked about, because trauma, like two children, like for example, when my aunt died, and then I was 8 years old. I still remember my mom being gone. I had to finish the enchiladas. I couldn't eat enchiladas for years because it reminded me of her death, right? The thing about trauma is that two kids could go through the same thing. But if one child was seen and heard by their mother or father or somebody versus somebody who it was just tucked under the rug, the child that at least they talked to them about it will suffer a lot less. I mean, we're talking about, the Gabor Mate did this study. So it's not two people go through the exact same trauma, but what happened in the environment right afterwards, right? So life is life. We have our children. Our children are gonna experience the transition of people that they love. We're gonna experience that. You cannot avoid it. You can't sugarcoat it. You can't go up to them and tell them they're in a better place. It's only the beginning. It's truly just holding space and listening and doing that for yourself too. If you're going through that, finding a community, finding somebody who will just listen to you without trying to save you or without trying to feel sorry for you. Just listen to you in neutrality. That's why a big part of the Kundalini yoga therapy training that we do, and the course teaches us this left and right, to never I to never acknowledge that identity of brokenness in someone else. If someone is going through an illness or going through grief, right? To look at them as whole and complete, because that's what they are, to see them in the Christ. And that's a big part of, like, this is why I always feel like triggered when I go to my Kundalini yoga therapist training, because the whole message, regardless of what we're studying, is like, you better be taking care of yourself because you cannot be there supporting others, and you're dealing with people's like biggest problems. And if you then all of a sudden go into feeling sorry for them or trying to save them, you both are going down. And I'm like, damn, I gotta change that, like, in a big way. So really, it's just about space, holding space. If this is for you, holding space for yourself. If this is for somebody that you're trying to help or they come to you for help, let them talk, let them feel. Don't try to make things better. Like, just allow that to happen. And then through the meditation, things that are active. Chanting is very, very, very good. Rama, Dasa, Sase, Sohang. That's one of the most beautiful mantras for self-healing and for healing others. And you can start by listening to it, falling asleep with it, just so that it could start to do some changes to your circadian rhythm and to the nervous system. And then get into action. A lot of people like exercise when they're going through grief. But again, when we talked about that, there was this famous influencer, and he was from Phoenix, who he had over 1 million followers, and he just took his life he unalived himself on Saturday. And everybody, he was buff, super buff, but he dealt with depressive disorders since he was a young child. And that's what I'm telling you. The gym is not going to do it all. It's as much as we want, it's just not, because we have to really deal with the nervous system. So I would say very slow, you know, 3 minutes a day. Can I breathe 3 minutes sitting down, right? Inhale, inhale, long, deep breathing. That's one of the easiest things to do in Kundalini yoga. Literally just slow breathing for 3 minutes. Can I do that? And can I stay consistent, keep it 40 days, just to recalibrate the brain? And then through those contractions and expansions, I promise you that in 40 days, you are going to feel something, whether it is a release, whether it is acceptance, there is even hope, because hope is so much better than worry or than fear. And it's not like new age jambalaya. The reason that you're feeling that way is because the nervous system is being re-educated from fight and flight from survival to, you know what? Maybe I can accept this. Maybe I can trust God. So we're not sugarcoating it. I understand how horrible loss is. I understand how horrible grief is as a mother, especially who has to go through this with the child or a miscarriage. But I do know, and this is what I do know to be 100% true, that it is 1,000% healable. And that if we address the nervous system, then we absolutely can have such a better hope to also not pass it down to our children. That's the most important thing, because our poor babies, I don't know about you, you're probably 5 years old, you don't remember as much, but when that stuff was going down, when my aunt died, like as an 8-year-old, all I wanted was to make my mom feel better. Like, I would do everything, and she was never feeling better. She would always get mad at me more and yell at me more and depressed, and I would clean and I would cook. And as an 8-year-old, I just wanted her to be happy. And it's not like she was crying all day, but as a child, I knew that she
Oh
was
yeah.
completely disconnected. Is that sort of like what you went through?
Yeah, you feel it, you know what I mean? You just. But I think the just taking it one day at a time.
Yes,
I had
yes.
a friend tell me that this summer. She's like, calm down, because I was going through something. She's like, well, just one day at a time. And ever since she said that, I was like, you know what, you're right. We're just one day at a time. We have to take it and you know, people, especially grieving somebody that has passed. I think the best way we could honor them is by actually living. And it's hard because you feel guilty. Like, how am I still here and they're gone and I'm gonna be happy and live my life? But if you really ask this loved one, what do you want from us? They'll be like, I want you to live. I want you to be happy. I want you to find love. I want you to, because if I pass, I want my family to be happy. I want my kids to live their lives and get married and have their kids and live full lives. I don't want them to be sad, depressed in the couch or in bed, all day long. I don't want that for them. I want them to live. I'm not, and I think as long as we remember that person and we honor that person, they're still with us. My abuelita still my sister still comes around.
Absolutely.
Every time I see her date of birth, I'll look at the clock. It's 12:08. Oh, Susan, she's still around. And my sister tells me, she's like, I don't have that connection with her. And I'm like, because I was waiting for her. You weren't born yet. I was waiting for her. That's why I have that connection with her. I was waiting for her. And she's still around. And I'm like, oh, Susan, mi hermanita, she's still with me. My abuelita too. She comes around every time I think about her. If I'm cooking, whatever, I'm like, and I remember, oh, mi abuelita, making tamales, make the masa float in the water. Oh, it's ready. Mi abuelita Felipa used to tell us that. They're always around. As long as they're in our hearts, they're always around. And the best way to honor them, and it's hard. It's hard to be like, how am I going to live my life? I get it. I do get it. But at the same time, I know for a fact that's what they want for us.
Yes. Oh my God, I'm so glad you said that. That's so, so important. And I know that it, like you said, it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
But the truth is that you have a breath. If we're here in these bodies, we have breath. We have, how many souls are waiting to incarnate in these bodies, and we're all trying to run away. And I know that's why it requires, the nervous system stabilization so that we can find gratitude and honor their life in the way that they're not here to do the things that we're still able to do. But yes, it does require, every journey is so different. Please do not rush your healing. I think the one way that we are allowing ourselves to live is because we chose the healing journey, don't you think?
Oh, yes. Yes. That's
So
another way we're honoring them as well, is by doing this healing journey.
exactly, because otherwise I know that I wouldn't even have the amount of gratitude and hope and faith and connection that I do have with my children. Because the thing about when people transition is that the reason they feel so guilty is because they were never there present with those people. They were always worried or angry and all that. And the whole thing is when you are present and learning to live, you're not afraid to die, and you're also not afraid for others to die because you gave them your all when they were here. So choosing ourselves and what you just said is so important. And the way we do that, it may not be you now partying every day and going on vacations and all that. What that means is that you're choosing to deal with the grief. You're choosing to heal it. And you're choosing to reach out for help too. That's very, very important because with grief, the number one thing is we retract and we don't want to be around anybody and we don't, and I get it. I get it. But if you're listening to this right now, this is your message. This is your sign that it's time to come out of that cocoon and to really allow those wings to spread as a beautiful butterfly, because now you have a wonderful angel that is supporting you from the ethers, like I love my ancestors. I have an altar for them, and I have a lot of them on there that I bet you their own families don't even know that I think about them every day, and I talk to them every single day, and when shit's going down, I go and I talk to them, and when things are great, I tell them thank you, and I see them rejoicing. So like you said, I feel like they're still here. So when I get into my little doubts, I have my teacher's picture right here too, Guru Jagat. I feel like she's always like looking at me like, girl, you still have a body. Like, like get over yourself. Go, go, go. So we get it. Easier said than done. But I think we can both agree that if we work on the nervous system and get that brain rewired, that even the most painful, tragic experience can absolutely be healed.
Yes, definitely.
Oh my God. So much can be, we're going to probably create a lot of more podcast episodes just from this topic because it's so deep, and I think maybe even just a whole one on miscarriages, because it's just so sad that so few women actually get help with this and carry this grief for a long time. But overall, we just want to share our compassion with everybody who, if you're listening to this, we see you, we understand you, and we also know that there is more than hope and faith for each and every one of you. So I guess last words for me is grief isn't just something that we endure. When we learn to face it with courage and allow the contractions and the expansions to occur, it becomes a path to healing, to connection, and to transformation. And it's not just for ourselves, it's for our ancestors and future generations. I know my grandmother, just like your grandmother, is cheering us on for our courage to feel a lot of the grief that many of our ancestors could not at one point. And for that, we are forever, ever grateful. So thank you all so much for joining us on this journey. Let us know. Feel free to share your own grief stories below in the comments. You can also join us in our free private Facebook group community, the Sovereign Sisterhood Movement. We have a weekly healing session there. This week we're going to be talking about grief in there. So join us there. I'll be sharing that mantra, the Ramadasa Sase Sohang mantra, to help you with any of you that need the self-healing. And the Academy is closed for enrollment, but you can also find out more about Satori Vitality and Spirituality, where it is where most women join us to actually begin their generational healing journey to work on the vitality and the energy. So links are going to be below. Those are my last words. Anything else, Elvira, before we close?
No, I think we're good.
Beautiful. Praying for all of you. We love you. We see you, and we'll see you next week. Satnam.